Good
Good morning,
morning.
Rabbi. Good
Good
morning.
morning. Almost ready.
Okay. Yes. Rabbi, last night, apropos nothing, I wasn't thinking about Purim or anything. The strangest thought came into my head. Why
Yeah.
would Ahasuerus offer up to half the kingdom to Esther? Was he just someone who kind of off the top of his head, he's that kind of guy? It's too much. I don't understand. Well,
So I don't know his motivation entirely, but I have this theory that a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to tell over to Rabbi Tursky something that I had said in front of him a few decades ago, which I said it at his house, and he listened to it, and he didn't offer any objections afterwards. So from then, I I would say I said this over in front of Rabbi Tversky, and he didn't offer any objections to it. But then I got to tell that over to him in front of him. What happened was I was in Milwaukee with my visiting for Shabbos. Tzipi and I were there visiting. My sister was there with her husband, and so Shabbos day, we went over to where the Turskys were. They were actually having lunch with their son, Rabbi Ben Zion Tursky. Another son, Mordechai Tursky, was there, and a grandchild and some other people, the rabbi and the rebbitzin. And the rabbi, in the midst of everything, he said he'd like me to say over Dvar Torah, like out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. So I was racking my brain. He said, we'll sing a Zemer, and then you're going to say it Dvar Torah. So I'm trying to think of what to say, and I didn't want it to just be anything. I wanted it to be something, special. And then I realized that a few decades ago, must have been the same parsha, I had said something, and he had never told me if he agreed. So I said, I want to say something because I said it a few decades ago in front of you, but you never said anything. So now I'd like to say it over and for you to tell me if you agree to it. And it was this Dvar Torah that had to do with it was it was in Toldos, and it was about Yaakov taking the brachos, and so I had suggested that there's a possibility that somebody could do everything that they're supposed to do. In other words, you're presented with a situation. There's no perfect answer. Oftentimes, this is the case, that we're presented with a dilemma. There's no perfect answer, and then we have to just choose one. So is it possible that somebody's put in a situation and they have to choose a path, and that path is the best path, and they execute it perfectly, but since that path involves suffering to the other person, the person would, the actor, the one who is choosing and taking what we would call the best path, because it causes suffering, that the actor would still receive a kind of punishment, or they would receive a negative blowback. and this is based on the notion of that whenever you act, this is what we would call midas hadin, that when you act, there is an effect, and that is a kind of automatic thing. So if you do something that causes suffering, suffering would come back to you, something like that. So, which seems like follows Yaakov afterwards, that Yaakov receives blowback from the fact that he took the blessings, and in the way that he did, and so what happens with him and Lavan, at the house of Lavan, especially ending up married to both Leah and Rachel. The fact that he's married to Leah seems to be presented by the language as an effect from taking the blessings. Because Lavan says, in our place, we don't give the younger before the older. It sounds like there's a kind of a literary reference that suggests that Yaakov, the fact that he's married to Leah now, is because he took the blessings, and that's going to lead to all sorts of suffering later on with the children. So, is it possible that he played it exactly as the best he could, but there would still be an effect? In other words, you would still suffer because you caused suffering. Because that does seem to be the pattern, the explanation of a lot of the commentaries. But the result is that you did something right, but you're still getting suffering from it. So, and then I gave the example of somebody who, this is a much more minor example, but let's say I'm in the room and I have my children in the room. Let's say I have a daughter, and my aunt comes into the room and she asks me, how does she look in this dress? And I say, she looks great in that dress. And that's what I'm supposed to say, no matter how she looks in that dress. I'm supposed to say that, and I'm directed to say that in situations like this, at least according to Hillel, it seems like that's the path, and that you're supposed to lie, even if you don't think she looks great in the dress. You're still supposed to say she looks great in the dress. So I did the proper thing, and then let's say this is over. Now my children were in the room with me, and they saw what happened, and I was modeling to them the right thing to do in that situation. But now my daughter is never going to ask me how she looks in a dress, because my daughter is going to know I lie. I'm supposed to lie. So there is a negative effect that comes from doing the right thing. That's just a minor example of it. So then I said to him, do you agree? And then like the whole family was like, I didn't even say it. I think his kids just turned to him and go, do you agree with what he just said? And then he said, yes, I agree with it. So I had another, that was all just to set up this. I had another situation where I've said this in front of the Twerskis, and they never disagreed with me. So I can't say they for sure they agree with me, but they didn't disagree with me. And that is that that Megillus Esther is, and you see this in Hasidic Sfarim, like the Bnei Yissaschar, he develops this quite extensively, that there is a messianic theme in Megillus Esther, that in some way Esther and Mordechai are fixing some of what went wrong when Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, and that's why, for instance, these events happen at feasts that are characterized as as drinking, as places that you drink. That, in other words, that wine is a featured element of the feast. And there is an opinion that wine is the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's one of the opinions in the Gemara. So he develops this very extensively that the only sense that wasn't impacted by eating from the tree was the sense of smell, because in the description, when Chava first is sort of approaching the fruit, it talks about that she saw it, that she thought about it, so she touched it. She was in a conversation with the snake, so she's listening, she's seeing, she's touching, she's tasting. The only sense that didn't get impacted is a sense of smell. And both Mordechai and Esther, their names bring up the notion of smell. Esther, her name she was called Hadassah, and Hadassim are very fragrant. In fact, they're still used in Israel today as your primary basamim. And Mordechai, the Gemara says, is mor dror, that he's myrrh, that which is also a fragrant. It's a sap, I think. So, anyways, he develops this very thoroughly. But you see this in other places that many see Esther as a kind of messianic text. That the salvation that is happening in the Megillah is a salvation that is in an opportunity to get a glimpse of what the final salvation will be like, and that when Adam and Chava, one of the effects of eating from the tree was that Vahu Yimshol Bach, that Adam will rule over Chava. This was not apparently the original design. Adam is not going to be the ruler of the relationship. He's not going to have the dominant position, the kind of patriarchal role in the relationship, but it's supposed to be Ezer Kenegdo. She is a helpmate, but like opposite him. They have the same standing. And that one of the effects of eating from the tree, which is characterized as a curse, is that hu yimshalbach, that he will rule over you. There was a change in the social structure. So just like, this is also something that I once said this at an AJOP conference, and afterward it was weird that it just happened that I said this in front of everybody. This was usually they have these breakout sessions and you're just talking to like 30 people, but this one was in front of everybody, and I happened to suggest this in front of like everybody there. And afterwards, a bunch of the rabbis went over to Reb David Cohn, who was like at the time, one of the senior scholars that were present at the event. He wasn't there when I said it, but they told him over what I said, and he said he agrees with me. I said that that in Messianic times, this is going to be revoked. It's going to be changed. That it's going to go back to the way it was, which is Ezer Kenegdo, and that this notion that man is somehow the decision maker in the relationship, and that he's like the ruler in the relationship, that is going to end in Messianic times. Just like we say with the other curses are going to end in Messianic times. So the curse that Adam would have to work by the sweat of his brow and bring up thorns and thistles. In other words, that his farming work is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. That we see in the Gemara, that the assumption that that's going to be undone, in Messianic times, and that in fact it's a sort of indication that you're entering Messianic times. You could say that women suffering in childbirth, it's still suffering what women go through, but there's all sorts of relief that's available for the suffering that was not available that long ago, and you could see that as an indication of Messianic times. So the notion that the curses are temporary, and that at some point they are, when we fix whatever happened in the Garden of Eden, that those curses will themselves be reversed, that seems to be established. And so it would be true about this thing too. It doesn't say it beferish, it doesn't say it necessarily, it didn't seem to say it beferish anywhere that this would be resolved, but why not? All the other ones seem, to, the assumption is they'll be resolved. So the other students went to Rav David Cohen, and he said he agrees with it. And in one of his Sfarim, in one of the books he printed, he says something like it. He felt like, and he agrees with the notion that it would be that this notion that within society men have a dominant role is going to disappear in Messianic times. And the fact that, because the argument I was making was, instead of being afraid of, many men are afraid of feminism because it means that and part of the fear of it is that somehow they're, deeply, and maybe they don't understand that this is part of the fear, but part of the fear is that the society is going to change, and men don't have the role that they once had, and that's frightening. So, but instead of being frightening, it should be embraced as a sign that Mashiach's coming. And so one of the indications I suggested is when Ahasuerus says to Esther, I will give you half the kingdom. I mean, these are, in a kind of midrashic sense, these are like words in his mouth. He may not understand what he's saying, but what he's saying is, in other words, this is where it's going. Esther is playing a role in the Megillah that many women have had to play before, which is sort of surreptitiously making things happen because they don't have the opportunity overtly to do it. But it in this case, it's an indication that that eventually that's where things are going. That that the women and men are going to have equal standing, sort of equal standing. And if you look back at the beginning, when Zeresh, the horror that they have that she refuses the order of the king, they're saying they say it overtly. Men are not going to be able to rule their families. In other words, the fear of the fact that it could go there. So the Megillah itself, especially if it's understood to have messianic tones in it, it seems to be expressing that in a messianic time, it will be 50-50, is just a symbol. But this notion that men will no longer have a dominant standing, that men and women are going to be equals, that kind of thing. So
I like it. Yeah.
It doesn't explain what he was really thinking, but it is a moment that certainly in tone reflects that.
I especially like it because I always thought that the story did have something to do with men. What happens to Vashti is what causes the whole thing to fall apart. So
right, and then Esther is sort of continuing this this thing, sort of almost against their will, and it's happening without their control, and that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm just going to get my tea.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Good. Miss seeing all of you guys in person.
You too. You too. You too.
Yeah, next week we should all be there.
I agree.
In person.
I agree. Where there is to be determined. It doesn't have to be here technically.
I'll be there. I'll be somewhere.
That's it. We're all
We'll all
be
be somewhere.
Here. Wherever we are, it's going to be here.
Yeah, got to be somewhere. All right.
All right. We are now at the beginning of Shlach, which is chapter 13. We spent a bit of time on that, the last part, which is the kind of drama with Miriam and Moshe and Aaron and God. they are the four actors in that drama that we just saw. Maybe just for a second, it allows us, especially because in this week's Torah portion, Miriam figures as an important actor. Again, her name is not mentioned, but we know it's Miriam, it's his sister. And she is part of how Moshe is saved. She's part of how Moshe is saved because she's been following his little basket, which interestingly is described in the same way as the ark, Noah's ark. If you look at the detail of how that basket was made, and even the name for the basket is the same as the name for the ark, Noah's ark. But anyways, so Moshe is, the baby is floating down the river, and Miriam is watching. She's watching. We have some sense that she's watching to make sure he's safe, but also to see what's going to happen with him. And then she sees how the daughter of Paro retrieves the basket, and then she offers to find a nursemaid for him. She gets his mother, who's Yocheved, and then so she's an important part of how he is saved. And she's, every once in a while, you see her as part of a three-part leadership of the Jewish people. A lot of times it's Moshe and Aaron, but she appears like after the splitting of the Red Sea at the Shalach. She leads the women in dancing afterwards in celebration of what happens. And there are a couple times where, like in our story, where it's clear that she is part of leadership, and it's really Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam at the top, not just Moshe and Aaron. But it's deeper. It's much deeper. Here you see them as siblings, and you see at Moshe praying. We don't get a lot of examples of the actual language of prayer in the Torah. We get some, but we don't get a lot of it. And this is one of the places where he says, El na rafah na la, God, please heal her. And that prayer, by the way, is a suggested prayer when it comes to healing, if you're asking for healing for somebody else. And you have this moment where, with Moshe interceding on her behalf, you do see them as siblings and Moshe caring about her. But later on, when Moshe strikes the rock, so it's not just that I know it sounds, oftentimes it's characterized that he made a mistake. God told him to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock. But if you look at what was going on there, he got angry. They made him angry. And he is responding in anger, like, you want me to do this? I'll do that. I'll show you. It was like he was angry. He had a moment of anger. And if you ask yourself why he had that, because it is not in his, as how he's characterized. He's characterized here at the end of Aloscha as the humblest of all men. That's why he is part of why he's distinguished from other prophets. He has a level of humility that no prophet's ever going to be able to have. And it's just out of keeping with his persona that he has this flare of anger. We understand that we've seen him also in Baloscha overwhelmed. So he is human, but still it seems to be uncharacteristic. If you look what happened right before is Miriam died. And so you could put the two together and suggest that he is uncharacteristically angry because his sister died. And that would be just another touch point in the connection between Moshe and Miriam and how important she was to him, that he has what might be his greatest collapse would be because she had just died. And that was the golden calf does not throw him off his game. Even the spies in the aftermath, it doesn't seem to throw him off his game. Korach is not going to throw him off his game, but his Miriam dying does. And so if you ask, what was the setup that created a situation where he could make his biggest mistake, is the fact that Miriam died. So her importance to him, I am suggesting there are touch points that allow us to see this. She may be the most important person to him in his life. And I have a cousin, her name is Genevieve Grenitz. She became a Reform rabbi, or I don't know, a non-denominational rabbi. She's a rabbi at a Reform synagogue in California. And I think she sent me an interview. Somebody was interviewing her about something, and she mentioned this person, and I forgot the woman's name, but I've shared this with you before, who her area of expertise is finding women where you don't at first think to look. She does this in the Talmud too. Like her first question, if there's an actual event that's being described, her first question is, where are the women? And she'll start to find them, in the narrative, but you at first don't think to look, right? But this would be a kind of, I don't know if she thinks about it this way, but this would be a kind of example if you asked, because there's times where a person is present, but you don't at first blush see them there. But then if you look around, you see that they are very present there. So you could say that at Moshe striking the rock, she is there. She's very present there. Okay, now we are on to Shlach. So again, we're in the first chunk of Bamidbar, in most of the first chapters of Bamidbar. It was law related to their time in the desert, but then, at some point in last week's Torah portion, that switched to narrative, and now we're really in the depth of the narrative part of Bamidbar. So I suggest that we read. So I suggest that we read up to 26, up to verse 26. So it's chapter 13, verse 1, Pasuk Aleph, until verse 26, which is Pasuk Kaf Vav. So who wants to read?
I'm happy to read if no one else wants to.
Okay, Linda, give it a go.
Okay. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to scout the land of Canaan. Oops. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Which I am giving to the Israelite people. Send one man from each of their ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them. So Moshe, by the Lord's command, sent them from the wilderness of Paran, all the men being leaders of the Israelites, and these were their names. You want me to read all the names?
Yeah.
Okie doke. From the tribe of Reuben, Shammua, son of Zahor. From the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, son of Hori. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. From the tribe of Issachar, Igal, son of Yosef. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hosea, son of Nun. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti, son of Raphu. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel, son of Sodi. From the tribe of Joseph, namely the tribe of Manasseh, Gadi, son of Susi. From the tribe of Dan, Amiel, son of Gemali. From the tribe of Asher, Sethur, son of Michael. From the tribe of Naphtali, Nahbi, son of Vopsi. From the tribe of Gad, Geul, son of Machi. Those were the names of the men who Moses sent to scout the land. But Moses changed the name of Hosea, son of Nun, to Joshua. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country, and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land." Now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes. They went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehov at Lebo Hamat. They went into the Negev and came to Hebron, where lived Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the Anakites. Now Hebron was founded 7 years before Zon of Egypt. They reached the Wadi Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by two of them, and some pomegranates and figs. That place was named the Wadi Eshkol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. Do you want me?
No, that's it. Okay, so there are several words, key words here.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Of course, thank you. So there are several key words here that are interesting to the commentaries. One of them is in verse 2 in the Hebrew, in Pasuk Beis, it says shlach lecha, send for you. That word lecha, for you, is going to be a subject of study. It's according to some commentaries, one of the most important words in this story. Again, every story has many themes and many elements, but one of the questions here is how did this happen? You know, is this a failure of leadership? Later on in Devarim, in the book of Devarim, in the beginning of the book of Devarim, Moshe is going to cite the spies episode as one of the reasons he's not allowed into Israel. It's usually not mentioned when people talk about that, but himself does mention it. So this is in the first chapter of Devarim. He says, So he says, this is in chapter 1, verse 37. God also displayed anger at me because of you, and he said, you too will not enter the land. Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, will be the one to enter. Now, this is right after he said, like in verse 34, he said, when God heard what you said, he angrily swore, no man of this evil generation will see the good land that I swore to you and your fathers. The only exception will be Caleb, son of Yefuneh, since he followed God wholeheartedly. Not only will he see it, but I will give him and his descendants the land he walked. God also displayed anger at me because of you. And he said, you too will not enter the land. So it sounds like, at least from the way the text appears on the surface, it sounds like that God was angry with Moshe for the whole spies thing, that there's like some kind of leadership mistake that's happening here. So you'll see that. So the commentaries suggest that the key to how Moshe is making a mistake here is the word lecha, send for you. So Rashi on this verse says, shlach lecha l'da'atcha. This is because you want to do this. This is your thinking. Ani eini matzav lecha. I'm not commanding you to do this. Im tirtza shlach. If you want to, you can send them. Because, and this is the way it's described in that chapter 1 over there, that in Deuteronomy and Devarim, the way he sort of elaborates, and he says that you came to me. He's saying this to the people, that you guys came to me and you said, let us send men, and then I turned to God. And in other words, I was the one who brought it to God. And so God here, when it says lecha, shlach lecha, he is saying, if you want to do this, you can do this. I'm not commanding you to do this, which seems to mean that Moshe is disregarding a hint from God that this is not a good idea. So this could be part of why he's later on going to be in our telling of the story, in the telling of the story in front of us. God is not going to say at the end what Moshe says God said in the end of Devarim, but sort of mining, looking back and trying to mine the story for clues as to how Moshe might have gone wrong here. That word lecha is an important word for you. Why is he saying that? Just say shlach anashim, send people. Why shlach lecha anashim, for you? So that's a key word that a lot of commentaries spend time on. I've mentioned this to you before, but in our story, in our telling of the story here in Bamidbar, it never uses the word meraglim, l'ragel et haaretz. Often later on in the Devarim version, they're going to actually use that word. That word is apparently the more specific word for spying, to be a spy. The word that's used here is latur, es haaretz, latur, to sort of travel the land. In the word tourism is the same word in modern Hebrew. They use that word to mean tourism. So a tourist in modern Hebrew is a tayar, taf yud yud reish, that's built on this word. So, and this is the word used here about as a verb for what they are doing. So in verse 21, for instance, it says, and they went up vayaturu et haaretz, and they I don't remember what Linda's translation I had for that. So that was verse 21, the second word in verse 21.
It says you're talking about turu.
Yeah.
It's, send men to scout.
To scout.
Yeah, but I know that I have notes here before that I had the word tour when I studied it before.
Yeah.
like you were saying, to travel the land, to tour.
Right. So it's just because in rabbinic, whenever there's a rabbinic discussion of this, these people mentioned here they're called meraglim. Those and that's the word that's more specific to spying. But that is not actually the word that's used here in more than one place. Even in verse 16, Moshe says, Latur et haaretz. It's not, I mean, I don't know that there has to be much different between the word for spying, but it's just interesting to note that the word here is not a word that has to mean spy, but could just mean people that are sort of looking over, traveling like a tourist. You're like looking around, you're fascinated by the land. But not that you're actually spying on the land. So that's another thing. Also, whenever we get to these names, I've been interested in looking at them. There is a notion, it's called a theophoric name, theophoric, Theophoric, theophoric names. Theophoric names, as it says in Wikipedia, theophoric names are names that have God's name embedded in them. So I bring this up because Moshe adds a yud to Yehoshua's name. Now his name was Hoshea. Hoshea does mean like a savior, but it doesn't specifically identify who is the savior. But when you add a yud before his name, you have yud hey vav, and many understand that to be a theophoric name. In other words, it is. What is the difference by adding that yud? By adding that yud, it's putting God's name in it. Not just any name of God, but God's, his, what we consider the closest thing to his personal name. So it's not Yud Hey Vav Hey. You don't see Yud Hey Vav Hey. And you like Yehuda is a name like that too. It has Yud Hey Vav, and that also seems to be a theophoric name with reference, and it has God's name in it. God's, what we would call the closest thing to God's personal name. There are a couple of these names that are theophoric, but the name that they have is El. El is it is a name we use with reference to God, but it's also a name that other cultures used with reference to God. Akkadians use the name El, and people of those times, early people whose linguists study that were not Jews, also have that name El. So it is theophoric, and when Jews use it, certainly we mean God, we mean our God, but there's a big difference between that and Yud Hey and Vav Hey. That name is on a completely different level than a name like El. So you do have, and in the beginning of these names, they're surprisingly without a theophoric element to them. But you get to, in verse 7, you get to Yisachar, and there you have Yigal. So he will, that could be the word, just the word Goel. It doesn't have to be theophoric, because a Goel is a redeemer. Yigal, he will redeem. And then you have Gediel in Yud, and you have Amiel in 12, and then you have Michael in 13, and you have Geuel in 15. So you start to have a cluster of these theophoric names, but again, all with the Aleph Lamed. So you could say that by adding the yud, he is making a mark that is very distinctive and bringing God's name into this in a very potent way by adding that yud. I personally have not seen a commentary that makes this point, but it seems very striking to me that this is what, on the surface, this is what he's doing. Okay. Also, the reference to Israel as Canaan, we've seen this before, that the land is, throughout the Torah, is called Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. Not just before we live in it, but even afterwards, it's called Eretz Canaan. I believe the first place, because Rabbi Daniel Fox gives a class on the book of Shmuel on Shabbos mornings, and we got to a place, I don't know, somewhere around chapter 12 or chapter 13, when Shmuel has anointed Saul as the first king, and that the name Eretz Yisrael appears, and he said, this is the first time from the beginning of Bereshis, if you see these as like continuous stories from the beginning of Bereshis until like chapter 12 or 13 of the book of Shmuel, it's the first time that the land is actually called Eretz Yisrael. In the Torah, sometimes it won't give a name to it. It'll just say the land which I will show you, like it does with Avram, the land which I will show you. Or sometimes it will, so sometimes or when it first, Jerusalem is never mentioned, in the Bible either, in the 5 books, but the place which I will show you. So there's a kind of mystery in the Torah about where Jerusalem's going to be, where the temple's going to be, but also the land seems to continuously be identified as the land of Canaan. Now, there are other people that live in the land besides the Canaanites. We've seen this in Vayikra when it talks about the fact that eventually they're going to be expelled. It mentions the Amori, the Chivi, the Girgashi, mentions several other peoples that live in the land, but Canaan gets its name. And you can't help reflecting back on Canaan, who's the grandson of Noah, and the story of Noah becoming drunk from the wine that he's grown, that he's made, and then the kind of cloudy incident with his son Ham, and then Noah cursing Ham's son, Canaan. So the fact that Canaan has this distinction of having been cursed by Noah, and then the residents are referred to as cursed in some of the narrative in Bereshis, it seems to also reference back to that, and the fact that it continues to become called the land of Canaan. It seems to want you to draw on the Noah story cursing Canaan, or at least to have some fragrance of that when it talks about the land. And then so Moshe,
Rabbi, in Linda's translation, they didn't mention, but in ours it is in the stone, about the offspring of the giant.
right? They call in hers, they call them Anakites. In Linda's one, it said they were Anakites. Anakites makes it sound like that's a race of people, just like there's Amalekites, there's Anakites, that they are just members of a nation. Bringing up that they are.
Can I just interrupt? The definition in here of Anakite is one of the original peoples of Canaan before Israel's conquest, known and feared for their size.
Right, but the word, when you use the word giants, I think you're I could see why some translators would hesitate to use the word giant, because giants has a broad meaning, but it also could have specific reference to other stories that appear in the Torah and in the Midrash. That and certainly that is the way a lot of the commentaries go. That there's a backstory, not just a backstory, but like a backstory that comes up at several different times in narrative throughout the Torah. Let me just see what Aryeh Kaplan does with it over here. So, for instance, a translator who wants to stick to the pshat, what we would call the pshat, may not want to highlight a connection to those because it's not obvious in the text that they should be connected.
I was just going to say the text does not say the word giant. It does call them by their name. So
it says Anakite. So
right.
That word Anakite could, in other words, Anakite, Ilidei, it sounds like the children of the Anakites.
Right.
So the question is, how do you translate Anakites? If you say children of the giants, now you're going, what giants? Giants? What giants are they talking about? And then you're going to start looking back, and there is this thread that is especially pronounced in Midrash. There's a thread that there were giant people, and the question is, who are these giants and where do they come from? So somebody who's just translating for the pshat may want to downplay that because it's not. If you're reading the pshat, the simple reading of the narrative, you don't have to go there. So why go there?
But later, the people called them Nephilim, which is the word back in Genesis.
Yes, now I agree. So you have certain touch points. I'm not saying there's not evidence for the commentaries that that see that won't that are jumping into it, diving into it. There is evidence for somebody to dive into it, but I could see somebody going either way, that they don't want to, especially because the Nephilim story in Bereshis, in Genesis, that is it's a kind of it's vaguely described in Genesis, but it goes to all sorts of places theologically that other peoples have very much connected to mythology, Greek mythology, but then Christianity have used that story extensively, and you're going to end up in funny places. You may have no choice but to go there, but I could see a translator is just saying, you know what, you don't have to. When you're reading the pshat, you don't have to, and trying to stay away from it. All right, so where are we now? So, like, for instance, the translation for giant here, Aryeh Kaplan says giant, and he cites Targum and Rav Sadigon. But then he does say, some say that Anak is just a proper name, and it doesn't mean it. Now, when they say Nephilim, he translated as titans, but he takes you back to Genesis 6:4. At that point, I wonder, Linda, what you have for that word in so this
For
would
what
be
word?
so this would be we haven't actually gotten there. This would be in verse 33. 33.
Verse 33, 1 second. 33 of
We didn't read it yet, but it's like, yeah, it's six verses farther. No, verse 33.
13. Okay.
Yeah.
It says 33. We saw you mean for Nephilim and Anakites?
Yeah, for Nephilim there. Yeah.
It just says, we saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them.
So does there any note on who
Yes.
the Nephilim are?
It says literally under Nephilim, literally fallen ones. The ancient Greek translation reads giants. See Genesis 6.4, where they are the products of marriages between divine beings and mortal women, possibly superhuman creatures. In the Scouts' first report, they are called Anakites, verse 28. Their identification with Anakites could have only one purpose: to instill even greater fear in the hearts of the people, because to the stature and strength of the Anakites is now added the dimension of the earliest giants.
So it's a kind of unfolding attempt to instill fear. That's how it might be understood. All right, we will come back to more of this. I look forward to that next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, and hopefully
Thank you.
everybody will be healthy. And
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All
Bye
right,
bye.
be well.
Linda.
Bye-bye.
Talk
Shabbat
to you,
shalom.
Liz. Bye bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos all.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.